It's one of the most enduring mysteries in American history. What happened to labor leader Jimmy Hoffa?
In 2019, a dying mobster named Nove Tocco said something that left everyone speechless. At a panel marking 50 years since Jimmy Hoffa vanished, he hinted that the truth was so crazy nobody would believe it. But new FBI files show Hoffa wasn't just missing money from union workers, he was funding actual murders.
Get the gun out of his hand!
Over $50 million in pension loans went directly to hitmen and weapons. And the most shocking part? The person who betrayed him wasn't who everyone thought. The latest evidence changes everything we knew about that day in 1975. Jimmy Hoffa was born on February 14, 1913, in a poor little house in Brazil, Indiana. The doctor who delivered him didn't even know it was a baby at first. He thought Jimmy's mother, Viola, had a tumor. That's how poor and unexpected everything was. They called him the tumor as a joke, but his life would be no joke at all. His father, John Cleveland Hoffa, was a blacksmith who worked for coal mines. He traveled on a mule through different counties just to earn enough to feed his family. They lived in a small three-room house on North Vandalia Street. Jimmy was born in the middle room. His father didn't make much money. He had to bite into coal with his teeth to check its quality. That's how rough life was back then. And Jimmy saw it all from the start. When Jimmy was just 7 years old, his world collapsed. His father died on October 19, 1920, in a hospital for the insane. The cause listed was general paralysis of insane, but the family believed it was the coal dust that killed him. He had been sick for 4 months. He died and was buried on the same day because they were too poor to delay the funeral. Viola, now a widow with 4 children, had to work day and night. She cooked in a restaurant, cleaned rich people's homes, and ran a laundry business from her own house. Jimmy and his siblings delivered the clothes around town. By 1924, when Jimmy was 11, the family moved to Detroit, hoping for a better life. But Detroit wasn't kind. At 14, Jimmy worked as a stock boy, and by 1929 he was working at a Kroger grocery warehouse. The job paid only 32 cents an hour. The worst part was that he had to stay for 12 to 15 hours every day, just waiting for shipments. They didn't pay for waiting. They only paid when the shipment actually came in. Sometimes, nothing came at all. The boss treated them like they were nothing. People were fired without reason. There was no job security, no benefits, nothing. It was like a prison, and Jimmy could see how the system was built to crush workers like him. Everything changed on April 13, 1930. Jimmy was only 17, but he pulled off something incredible. A trailer full of strawberries and cantaloupes arrived at the warehouse. Jimmy knew that fruit spoils fast, so he got a few workers together and refused to unload the trailer. They folded their arms and just waited. Minutes passed. The fruit started to rot in the sun. Management panicked. They tried to pressure Jimmy, but he stood firm. Within 1 hour, the company gave in. They agreed to higher wages and insurance benefits. Just like that, Jimmy won. That moment made him a legend. Detroit in the 1930s was a nightmare. The auto plants were like war zones. Jimmy's mother worked at a Fisher body plant polishing radiator caps. The shifts were long. The pay was terrible. There was no safety gear. People lost fingers and arms in machines, and nobody cared. If you got injured, you were thrown away like garbage. The companies had thugs who beat union organizers with bats and brass knuckles. The police arrested workers again and again. Jimmy saw this and understood something important. If you wanted to fight a violent system, you had to be just as strong, maybe stronger. In 1932, at just 19 years old, Jimmy made his big move. He was still at the Kroger warehouse, earning those same 32 cents an hour. A railway car full of strawberries pulled in again, and Jimmy remembered what worked before. He told the workers not to unload. This time, he said they had formed their own union. The company panicked again. They didn't want the fruit to spoil, so in less than an hour, they agreed to everything Jimmy asked for. That moment caught the attention of Teamsters Local 299. In 1933, they made him a full-time organizer. That same year, he faced real violence. In the Detroit laundry workers' strike of 1933, Jimmy got beaten over and over again. Cops and company men split his scalp open 6 times. He was arrested 24 times in a single day, but he kept coming back to the picket line. He learned something then. You don't win with kindness, you win with muscle. He said, always have more muscle than the other guy. You win that way. That became his rule. During one laundry strike, he met a young woman named Josephine Posewak. She was just 18. He said it felt like being hit in the chest with a blackjack. They married on September 25, 1936, in Bowling Green, Ohio. Josephine was 19. They had 2 kids, Barbara and James Jr. In 1939, they bought a house in northwest Detroit for $6,800. That was the same city where Jimmy would build his empire. Josephine stayed by his side through everything. But behind his success was a dark alliance. In 1937, Jimmy made a deal with a man named Angelo Mele. Mele was a dangerous mob boss in Detroit. He had ties to murder and armed robbery, but rarely got convicted. Jimmy needed muscle, and Mele provided it. In return, the mob got control over labor. Jimmy got protection. Together, they grew stronger. This marked the start of the Teamsters' long and dirty connection with organized crime. By 1939, Jimmy created the Strawberry Boys, an enforcement team named after his famous fruit strike. These men weren't peaceful. They carried bats, chains, even guns. They beat up anyone who refused to join the union. They bombed trucks and even homes if employers didn't give in. Jimmy's message was clear: join the union or suffer the consequences. It worked. Membership exploded. Wages went up. The Teamsters became unstoppable. That same year, Jimmy officially became president of Local 299, even though most people wrongly say it happened in 1940. He was only 24. The local had been broke, but Jimmy turned it around. By 1940, he was running contracts across states. He got drivers 20 to 50% more pay. In 1942, he formed the Michigan Conference of Teamsters so he could make deals for the whole state. That gave him even more control. In May 1937, there was another violent moment in Detroit's labor history. It wasn't Jimmy's group, but the UAW. They were handing out leaflets at Ford's River Rouge plant when Ford's thugs beat them badly. Walter Reuther and Richard Frankenstein were attacked. Jimmy wasn't there, but it happened during the time he was rising. And the violence that day showed just how brutal labor battles had become. By 1946, Jimmy had expanded the Teamsters all over the Midwest. He controlled thousands of contracts. But he also started doing something risky. He used pension funds as tools of power. In 1955, he helped create the Central States Pension Fund. It grew to $2.2 billion. He gave out loans to banks and mob-backed businesses. That included casinos in Las Vegas, like Caesar's Palace and the Stardust. These deals helped the union, but they also helped the mob, and that would haunt him forever. In the early 1950s, Jimmy teamed up with Dave Beck, who became Teamsters president in 1952. Beck liked Jimmy's results. He said, "I wish I had 40 more like him." But the two of them got into shady deals. They took payoffs. They created fake union locals just to gain power. In 1959, Beck was convicted of tax fraud. That same year, Jimmy testified before the Senate. He claimed he couldn't remember answers to 111 questions. People saw through it. The Teamsters' reputation took a massive hit. In 1957, Jimmy Hoffa finally got what he had been chasing for years. At the Miami Beach convention, he took over as president of the Teamsters after Dave Beck got caught using $150,000 in union money to fix up his estate. Hoffa didn't waste a second. He tightened his grip on all 1.5 million members and turned the Teamsters into the most powerful labor union in the country. His biggest move came in 1964 when he created a single contract for 450,000 truck drivers across North America. That agreement gave him so much power that even Robert F. Kennedy said Hoffa was the most powerful man in the country after the president. That same year, the AFL-CIO kicked the Teamsters out by a massive vote. But Hoffa didn't care. It actually helped him. He saved $840,000 a year in dues and used that money to strengthen his own empire. Then came the 1958 Senate hearings. They put Hoffa under the spotlight for nearly a month. Robert Kennedy, who was the chief counsel, grilled him every day. The hearings revealed Hoffa's deep ties to the mob. The worst part was when they exposed his connection to Paul Dorfman, a powerful mob figure from Chicago. Paul had taken over the waste handlers union after its original leader was found dead. One of his local officers was Jack Ruby, the same man who would later shoot Lee Harvey Oswald. The committee also uncovered how Hoffa funneled over $3 million in insurance contracts to Alan Dorfman, Paul's son. Alan's pay jumped from $5,200 in 1949 to $166,508 in 1954, and $165 million of those fees were completely unnecessary. When asked about all of this, Hoffa claimed he didn't remember, 111 times in one session. By 1959, Hoffa was cleaning house. He kicked out corrupt local leaders but replaced them with his own loyal men, giving him even more control. At the same time, he started secretly using Teamster pension money to fund Las Vegas casinos. In 1958, he approved $4 million for the Dunes Hotel and $250,000 for newspaper owner Hank Greenspun. Then he gave $1 million to former Cleveland mobster Mo Dalitz to build Sunrise Hospital. He also approved $6 million for the Stardust in 1960 and $4 million for the Fremont in 1961. Over the next few years, millions more went into Caesar's Palace, the Landmark, the Aladdin, and Circus. Officials later estimated that mobsters skimmed about $300 million from these casinos. In 1960, Hoffa started a new program called Drive. It was supposed to help educate voters, but really, it was a cover for illegal campaign donations. Each Teamster member was expected to give 50 cents a month, which added up to $9 million a year. Hoffa used this money to buy off politicians and funnel cash through wealthy donors. He even paid for Detroit judges' re-election campaigns to protect his allies. One of those judges later dropped corruption charges against his right-hand man, Frank Fitzsimmons. Hoffa was now too deep in the political system for anyone to touch him. But in 1961, things got dangerous. Someone planted dynamite under Hoffa's car. The mob was sending a message. Some crime families were tired of his independence and wanted him gone. The FBI believed it was rival mob bosses who feared Hoffa was no longer controllable. While Southern bosses like Carlos Marcello and Santos Traficante still supported him, others were switching to Fitzsimmons. That failed bombing showed Hoffa was running out of time. That same year, Robert F. Kennedy became Attorney General. He put together what became known as the Get Hoffa Squad. It was a team built just to take Hoffa down. Kennedy believed Hoffa was greedy, violent, and corrupt. Hoffa saw the Kennedys as spoiled rich kids who didn't understand working people. Their feud turned personal, and Kennedy made it his mission to bring Hoffa down. By the summer of 1962, things got even worse. Secret wiretaps caught Hoffa talking about killing Robert Kennedy. He told Edward Parton that it would be easy because Kennedy had barely any protection. When JFK heard about the plot, he told journalist Ben Bradley to leak it, hoping Hoffa would back off. Bobby Kennedy wanted it kept quiet, so it wouldn't affect trials. Parton later became the key witness in Hoffa's jury tampering case, passing a lie detector test and helping prosecutors build their case. In 1963, Hoffa got his way at the Teamsters Convention. He pushed through $240 million in pension loans to Las Vegas casino developers tied to organized crime. By then, the pension fund was worth $213 million, and most of it was going to mob-controlled projects. Hoffa even arranged for Jay Sarno, who ran Caesar's Palace, to get $20.4 million between 1965 and 1972. Hoffa also took 10% kickbacks on each loan. It was a perfect system for skimming cash without anyone noticing. On July 26, 1964, Hoffa was convicted in Chicago of conspiracy and fraud over a $25 million pension fund scam. He and his partners had approved $20 million in fake loans and got $1.7 million in kickbacks. The trial lasted 13 weeks. Hoffa's lawyers were so desperate, one even threw coins at the prosecutors, yelling they'd sold their souls. Hoffa got 5 years on each charge, to run with his earlier 8-year sentence for jury tampering. In 1965, even after his conviction, Hoffa used union funds to go after the Kennedys again. He poured millions into an anti-Kennedy smear campaign. He printed lies and distributed them widely, trying to make the Kennedys look like mob puppets. All this while still tied up in mob deals himself. He even kept this going after Bobby Kennedy left the Justice Department to run for Senate. Hoffa's legal nightmare began in 1964 when he offered $10,000 to bribe a juror named Grattan Fields. He was convicted in Chattanooga on March 4, 1964. The judge gave him 8 years, plus another 5 for fraud and conspiracy. He delayed his prison time with appeals until March 1967. But that gave his enemies time to take over. When Hoffa got to prison, he didn't slow down. At Lewisburg Penitentiary, he ran the place like a mini-empire. Time magazine said it was the most powerful group of prisoners ever. His team included a presidential aide, a Tammany leader, an army colonel, businessmen, and even a PhD. Hoffa threatened guards, organized protests, and kept full control. One guard tried to take a prisoner's law books, and Hoffa told him if he did, they'd file so many lawsuits his head would spin. His biggest mistake was trusting Frank Fitzsimmons to hold his place. Hoffa thought Frank was weak, but once Hoffa was locked up, Fitzsimmons took over everything. He fired Hoffa's allies, even removed his wife from her job. Fitzsimmons became Nixon's golfing buddy and handed the pension fund over to the mob with no questions asked. Hoffa's system of control was gone. He later exposed the truth about life inside Lewisburg. He talked about how drugs were everywhere. Heroin, hash, pills. Hundreds of inmates lined up for their fix. He said guards were the ones sneaking it in, not visitors. Some guards walked through solitary confinement, spraying mace at random. Hoffa's testimony shook people, but it also made him more of a target. In December 1971, Nixon commuted Hoffa's sentence, but added a trap. Hoffa was banned from union work until 1980. He found out about the restriction a day after his release. He tried to fight it in court in 1974, claiming it wasn't part of the deal. Some believe Hoffa paid $300,000 for the commutation. Others say Tony Provenzano paid Nixon $500,000 to make sure Hoffa stayed out of the Teamsters for good. It worked. Hoffa was free, but powerless. Still, he didn't give up. In 1972, Hoffa secretly met with mob bosses, including Tony Provenzano, to try to get back in. The pension fund had grown to $1.4 billion while he was in prison, and the mob didn't want him interfering. When Hoffa refused to give Provenzano more control, things got physical. Witnesses said the two actually traded punches. Provenzano later warned him to walk away or die. In 1973, Hoffa sued Fitzsimmons for embezzlement, exposing how union money was being stolen through fake jobs. His brother was paid $37,700 for work he never did. Hoffa's evidence showed over $1 million a year was going to ghost payrolls. Fitzsimmons was caught on wiretaps discussing the theft. Hoffa was ready to burn it all down. Then came another assassination attempt in 1974. In Detroit, Hoffa's enemies tried to kill him again. This time, it was linked to Fitzsimmons's men. A group led by Big Mac McMaster used bombs and beatings to scare Hoffa's supporters. Hoffa struck back. Just 20 days before his disappearance, someone bombed the car of Fitzsimmons's son at a Detroit bar. In early 1975, Jimmy Hoffa felt trapped. He had been released from prison, but only under one condition, that he stay away from the Teamsters Union until 1980. He blamed Frank Fitzsimmons, the man who had taken his place. Hoffa had gathered proof that Fitzsimmons had worked with Nixon's people, making a secret deal to get Hoffa out early. The deal included over $1 million in campaign donations from the Teamsters in exchange for Hoffa's release. But there was a catch. Hoffa would be banned from union activities. Hoffa found letters and records showing Fitzsimmons had spoken with Nixon's advisor, Chuck Colson, about the plan. Feeling betrayed, Hoffa threatened to go public unless Fitzsimmons stepped down and supported his return. But Fitzsimmons didn't back down. Instead, he strengthened his ties with the mob to hold on to power. Hoffa's threat made him dangerous, not just to the Union, but to the entire underworld. He had crossed a line, and he didn't even realize how alone he was becoming. Around the same time, the FBI was watching closely. In 1975, they released secret files showing just how deeply Hoffa had used the Teamsters pension fund to help the mob. What started as $400 million had grown to nearly $1.5 billion. But it wasn't going toward retirements. It was being used to fund loan sharking, hits, and all kinds of violence. Hoffa, working with Alan Dorfman, who had strong ties to the Chicago mob, had approved loans to known killers. In at least 15 cases, Hoffa personally signed off on deals that funded murders in different states. Wiretaps even caught Hoffa talking about how the money would be used to buy weapons and pay hitmen. Over $50 million in pension loans were tied directly to violent crimes. Hoffa wasn't just bending rules. He was helping build a murder-for-hire network using union money. Things boiled over in June 1975 at a Teamsters wedding in New Jersey. Hoffa and mobster Tony Provenzano, known as Tony Pro, faced off in front of everyone. The fight was over who controlled Teamsters Local 560 in Union City. Hoffa accused Tony Pro of taking over without permission. People said the two started shouting. Then Tony Pro shoved Hoffa into a table full of wedding cake. But it didn't stop there. FBI informant Frank Sheeran said Tony Pro looked Hoffa in the eyes and promised to kill him and even his grandchildren. Guests watched in shock as bodyguards pulled them apart. Days later, the FBI saw Provenzano's men moving weapons and setting up safe houses. Tony Pro had made up his mind. Hoffa had embarrassed him in public, and now he had to pay. On July 30th, 1975, Hoffa went to meet Tony Pro and Tony Giacalone at the Machus Red Fox restaurant near Detroit. He believed they were ready to make peace and talk about bringing him back into the Union. The meeting was set for 2 p.m., and Hoffa showed up right on time. But nobody else did. At 2:15, he called his wife from a payphone. He said he was angry and confused because they hadn't shown up. He said he'd be home by 4 to cook steaks for dinner. He didn't know he was walking straight into a trap. Neither Tony Pro nor Tony Giacalone had ever planned to come. FBI records showed Tony Pro was playing cards in New Jersey, and Tony Giacalone was at a social club in Detroit, both with strong alibis. Hoffa was set up. Even worse, someone Hoffa trusted helped set the trap. Charles Chucky O'Brien, Hoffa's foster son, had borrowed a maroon 1975 Mercury Marquis from Joe Giacalone, Tony's son. Witnesses said Hoffa got into that exact car with 3 other people that day. O'Brien claimed he used the car to deliver a frozen 40-pound salmon to a friend. But that didn't explain why trained police dogs found Hoffa's scent in the back seat and trunk. There was also a 7-Up bottle with O'Brien's fingerprints and hair in the car, later confirmed by DNA to belong to Hoffa. He never made it home. 11 days after the disappearance, the FBI launched one of the largest search operations in U.S. history. On August 8, 1975, they got a warrant for the Mercury, saying they had strong reason to believe it had been used in Hoffa's abduction. They searched farms, landfills, and barns across several states. They found blood on the car seat, but it turned out to be fish blood, just like O'Brien said. Still, the FBI bought the car for $6,000 in 1977 and used it as a mail vehicle while keeping it as evidence. Millions were spent, but Hoffa's body was never found. Then, in 1976, a grand jury heard testimony naming Salvatore "Sally Bugs" Briguglio as the killer. The FBI said Hoffa was likely picked up and driven to a house in Detroit where he was shot. His body was then taken to a mob-controlled sanitation company in Hamtramck. When the FBI searched it, they found nothing. A few months later, that same building mysteriously burned down in a fire. The mob had erased the crime scene. Sally Bugs, a known mob hitman, was brought in to testify, but the truth stayed buried. On December 9, 1982, 7 years and 4 months after he vanished, Hoffa was declared legally dead. But the theories didn't stop. In that same year, Charles Allen, a mobster who did time with Hoffa, told a Senate committee that Hoffa's body had been chopped up, shipped to Florida, and dumped in a swamp. In 1989, another hitman named Donald "Tony the Greek" Francos claimed Hoffa was buried under Giant Stadium in New Jersey. That spot was nicknamed the Jimmy Hoffa End Zone. But when the stadium was torn down in 2010, nothing was found. The FBI's strongest theory came in 1993. On a wiretap, Detroit mobster Tony Palazzolo was caught bragging that he had put Hoffa's body in a meat grinder. Prosecutors believed Palazzolo, Billy Giacalone, and Sally Bugs carried out the hit on orders from mob boss Joe Zerilli. One informant claimed Hoffa was beaten and strangled at a house in Franklin Village, just 10 minutes from a social club the Giacalones controlled. His body was burned in another mob-connected sanitation site that also burned down. It was what crime writer Scott Bernstein called the perfect crime. Other strange stories kept coming. In 1989, mob goon Marvin Elkind said he was once told to say good morning to Jimmy Hoffa, while pointing to Detroit's Renaissance Center, hinting his body was buried under it. Contractors even found multiple corpses during the stadium's construction in 1976, but never Hoffa. After a while, they stopped reporting them to avoid delays. In 2019, just before his death, Frank Coppola told investigator Dan Moldea that his father Paul helped bury Hoffa in the PJP landfill in Jersey City. Frank swore under oath that his father said, "This is where Jimmy Hoffa is buried," pointing to a spot under the Pulaski Skyway. He said the body was stuffed headfirst into a 55-gallon drum and buried along with dozens of chemical barrels. The FBI dug there in 2021 and 2022, but found nothing. Ironically, the FBI had searched that same landfill in 1975, but gave up without exact directions. Even though Hoffa's body was never found, his impact was huge. He turned the Teamsters into the most powerful union in the country. In 1964, he created the National Master Freight Agreement, covering all drivers under one deal. That moment is still seen as the best time for truck drivers. But he also damaged the union's name. Hoffa helped finance mob-controlled casinos in Las Vegas with Teamsters money, funding places like Stardust, Desert Inn, Dunes, Caesar's Palace, and Circus Circus. The same pension fund that gave workers a future was used to help the mob grow stronger. In 2019, Martin Scorsese's film, The Irishman, showed Hoffa's fall. Al Pacino played him as a proud man whose refusal to back down led to his doom. On July 23, 2025, the 50th anniversary of his disappearance, a panel met in Michigan. Former prosecutor Richard Convertino, mob expert Scott Bernstein, and ex-mobster Nove Tocco spoke publicly. Tocco said something that left people stunned. Sometimes, the best way to lie is to tell the truth. Knowing Tony, that is exactly what he would do. The truth is so unimaginable that nobody believes it. The crowd went silent. The mystery remains.